Welcome, Jim Otto, the greatest center in AFL history.
Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Parkbridge Sports History. This episode will start with just a passing fancy or just a blessing on the career of Oakland Raider center Jim Otto, because he, put it this way, of many linemen in the 60s and the 70s, this player, even though I never rooted for the Raiders at all, resonated with me because of his unique number, 00, and he is the last player on the offensive line to have 00, or even that matter, the number 0 on his uniform number, as they've become more, official sensitive to the numbers, so they're blocked off according to your position. That's why you have certain numbers from, let's say, 0 to 19 be quarterback, and in the 50s and 60s for being your lineman, etc. But Jim Otto was that unique player that had a 00 as his uniform number, and he wore it with great passion and great pride for those great Raider teams of the 60s and 70s. And he did play, fortunately, on their one championship team under John Madden and in his illustrious career back in 1976-77 when Oakland thrashed the Minnesota Vikings in the Super Bowl 32-14. But what really always struck me with Jim Otto was the fact that, wow, if you ever saw his life post-NFL career, it was one of just unbelievable pain as he underwent multiple surgeries on multiple parts of his body, and in many respects, 15, 16 surgeries, it seemed, on the same either knee joint or back or neck and all the rest of it. And I do remember reading an article where it took him like 30 minutes just to get out of bed in the morning because of all the pain and just unbelievable just damage that he did to his body, all in the name of playing professional football. And I think at the end of his career, he even had either his, his toes or foot or even leg amputated because of the damage done in his many years toiling in the NFL. And I will tell you this, if you ever take a look at Jim Otto in the old NFL films and stuff, his nose or the bridge of his nose was always bloody. You know, it looked like an old horseshoe, for better, on the rim of his, or on the top of his helmet. It was supposed to be a nose guard, and all it did was he'd get hit, and the nose guard would just come crashing, and pulverize his nose, and he'd always be bleeding and all the rest of it. It probably wouldn't even go in today's game, but that was just part of the NFL as I remember it. But Jim Otto passed away late last month, and he really did leave a legacy. He actually brought, I think, the position of center into a whole new realm, into a different stratosphere in terms of respect and pride in that position, because centers are now seen as probably the brains of the offensive line, calling out many of the signals, of course, always having that integral relationship with the quarterback, because everything starts with the hike. And if they mess up the hike, if they mess up the transition of the center giving the ball to the quarterback, the whole play implodes, and it could mean a win or a loss in that record for the team. Here's what I really wanted to do. I'm talking to my brother Eddie, and we got onto, and of course, I love getting on Lou Gehrig, and anybody who has followed this show knows I am not a Yankee fan, but I become so enthralled. Many times on Parkbridge Sports History, you'll know I'll go off on a tangent on the great Lou Gehrig. And I actually didn't even realize this, but we celebrated June 2nd, Lou Gehrig's Day in Major League Baseball. I think that's great. And Of course, he comes down with the unbelievable dreaded disease. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I'll just call it what everyone else, layman's term, Lou Gehrig's disease, which really is a disease that affects your muscles. And for Lou, who at age 39 was stricken with it, probably at the age of 37, probably was unaware of it, forced him into retirement, ended his great starting streak of games played for the Yankees, and really, within a couple of years, I think the great Iron Horse had passed away. Nonetheless, he, like the Ruths, like the Mantles, like the Mazes, like the Koufaxes, they just leave a legacy. And I think that any time you talk about great first basemen, it always starts with Lou Gehrig. 493 home runs, a 340 batting average, a triple crown, 2,100 straight games playing first base for the Yankees, numerous World Series titles, MVP, 7 home runs shy of 500. It would have been amazing had Lou been able to play maybe those last 2 years. Probably would have finished with maybe 550 home runs. What really has always rankled me with Lou Gehrig is the fact that, ready for this, he came up kind of short on the RBIs. I think he just missed, and I just did some stats on that. Gehrig finished with 1,995 RBIs lifetime. He and Aaron just short of 2,000. I always wanted him just to stick around and play longer for that very reason. But Gehrig, 493 home runs, 1,995 RBIs, unbelievable 340 batting average. Now, why am I always bringing this up? Well, I asked my brother, hey, want to get involved with the show? I said, I was going to do a show on guys who have hit 4 homers in a game. My brother sends me, and this is awesome because you can write unbelievable essays with this. He took all 17 players and has a little bullet, plus my brother's a beautiful writer. Just want you to know that. So I'm being prejudiced, but I know what I'm talking about. He's a beautiful writer. And he gave me little stats, figures, anecdotes about the players. I don't know whether I can highlight them all on the show, but I will definitely talk about some of them. I went another way and decided to not just do the players involved in the game, but the pitchers who served up the home runs. And I will tell you this, before I get into my brother's stuff, I found this out. All right. When Mike Schmidt hit his 4, well, I'm going to give you the list of guys. Let me read it off my brother. The very first guy was 1894, May 30th. So it just occurred, right? 1894. So you're talking about May 30th, just had the anniversary of it. Bobby Lowe, the Boston Beaneaters, they defeated the Cincinnati Reds behind his 4 home runs, 20-11. Now, of all these, only 2 times in Major League history has a guy hit 4 home runs in a game and his team lost. All right. The next guy, Ed Delahunty, who is a Hall of Famer. He became the second player in Major League history to hit 4 home runs in a single game. 2 of them were inside the park. I didn't know this. And Delahunty becomes the first team to lose with a guy hitting 4 home runs in a game. The other one, just in case I forget, is Bob Horner back in 1979. His team, at the time it was the Braves. They were beaten, I think, by the Cubbies. Well, we'll get into that. But they actually lost the game like 9-8. Lou Gehrig, of course, probably the highest scoring. 20-13, the Yankees beat the A's. And they needed all 4 home runs from Lou to win this game because I think it was back and forth. I had the box score up, and I'm not going to do that transition and bother you all. But I know it was like a 2-run lead, and all of a sudden the A's make an unbelievable comeback, cut it to 2, and the Yankees have to score like 6 or 7 runs in the bottom of the 8th to seal the deal. And they just pounded. Ready for this? My brother writes, Yankee first baseman Henry Louis Gehrig became the 3rd player in Major League history to hit 4 home runs in a single game. He hit 4 home runs in his first 4 at-bats. And actually, ready for this? Those home runs were hit against, ready for this? Gehrig hit 3 off George Earnshaw, and then the 4th one off Roy Mahaffey. Actually, in that game, Gehrig he had 4 hits, or I think he had 5 hits and 6 RBIs in the game. Let me just see. I did have it ready for this. Gehrig was 4 for 6, 4 runs scored, 6 RBIs. The only positions, DH, pitcher, catcher, and shortstop, are the only positions that have not had a guy hit for 4 home runs. Now, I'm not saying that they're like a Bob Horner was brought up as a third baseman. That day he was playing first base. So that was the position that he was playing at the time. And so it's mostly outfielders and first basemen. The only third baseman, of course, is Mike Schmidt in 76. But Gehrig in that day on June the 3rd, 1932, another game that we've just been celebrating. And you know what? It's amazing. I forgot. I was watching the Yankee game this week. I don't think they did have, the Gehrig buttons or things sewn on, but I don't think they mentioned about his 4 home run game. And I could have missed it. But he was 4 for 6, 6 RBIs, 4 runs scored. The next guy, of course, one of my favorite players who's kind of overlooked because he played on some terrible teams. And his name, here is Ed Delahanty, by the way. Look at those old uniforms. I just want to read this about Gehrig. He hits the 4 home runs, but his greatest day was overshadowed by the announcement of John McGraw's retirement, probably and arguably the greatest manager in baseball history. I know that there are probably Society of American Baseball researchers who might disagree with that. They might say it could be Casey Stengel, could be Miller Huggins and all the rest of it. But I love the debate. This is what's probably of all the sports, baseball has the greatest debates. And I think because it just has the longest history going all the way back, to the Civil War or post-Civil War, and then being, professional league in 1869 or with professional teams by then. So you're talking the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st century. But the announcement of McGraw's retirement, I didn't even know this, so thanks, Ed. In Gehrig's 6th at-bat, Al Simmons, who was a great player, robbed him of a potential home run with a leaping catch in deep center field, so he could have been the first guy to hit 5 home runs. Now, why I did the pitchers was this. There's only one Hall of Fame pitcher that was involved in this, and that's actually Warren Spahn against Willie Mays, 1961. But that's not to say that these pitchers that these guys hit these home runs off were tomato cans. In fact, George Earnshaw, who served up 3 to Lou Gehrig, was actually 127 and 93 in his career. Did have a high ERA, 4.38, but in context of the times, you have to realize, and I did a show on this, the 1930s still, or was and still remains the highest offensive decade in the history of baseball, even with the advent of the DH. And we did a show on this back in 1973 in the American League. Even though there's been upswing, obviously, with the DH, it really hasn't had the offensive production or effect that, the 1930s, it was just unbelievable. So that 4.38, taken in context, maybe it might be a half run lower. So now you're talking about maybe a 3.88 ERA. But then again, he was playing for some good Philadelphia teams, obviously. He actually was a 3-time 20-game winner, Earnshaw. And the other guy he hit it off, Roy Mahaffey, who was actually 67 and 49. All right. Chuck Klein. And I think I have Klein's here somewhere. Hang on, because I did kind of do this in somewhat order. Chuck Klein, I'm going once. Chuck Klein on his big day was 4 for 5, 6 RBIs. My brother writes, it was done at Forbes Field, which in no shape or form was a hitter's ballpark. It had a huge left center field. But again, he's a right fielder. Chuck Klein becomes the 4th player in Major League history to hit 4 homers in a single game. His 4 homers included one in the 10th inning. And I do believe that was the first game that does go extra innings. And I think Schmidt's game also goes to the 10th inning. So there's only 2 games that went extra innings in the history of the 4 home run game. Number 5. Okay. This is great. My brother puts in Josh Gibson. I just did a cartoon. I have some of my cartoons now on a website called MLBReport.com, and I just did about the Negro Leagues now being included in, at least with Baseball Reference anyway. Their stats are included in the same way officially. They were doing it unofficially. Kudos to them. The last few years. And it kind of confused me a couple of times because I was saying to myself, wait a minute, I've never heard of this guy. And then I realized it said NL. He said, wait a minute, NL, what National League player? And then I realized in Baseball Reference, if you see that, it stands for Negro Leagues. And Josh Gibson, of course, man, oh man, he had some tremendous seasons. And Baseball Reference actually did this. Gibson really played the equivalent of half seasons. 69, 70, maybe 75 games. So they did the equivalent. And I've always kind of had a problem with this, but it's kind of cool with this one. Just imagine this. Here's Josh Gibson, who hit 4 home runs in a game. They beat the Memphis Red Sox. He played for the Homestead Grays. The game occurred in Zanesville, Ohio at Mark Park. How about that for a rhyme scheme? Grays right fielder Josh Gibson became the 5th player in Major League history to hit 4 home runs, which he accomplished in a game against the Memphis Red Sox of the Negro American League. And I'm not up to date on Negro American League, Negro League, etc. I'm not really sure. I know they had all-star games. They used to run 2 all-star games every year for a while there, played them at Comiskey. So it was the Negro American League that he did it, the Memphis Red Sox. No box score for the game has been located, but visit Gary Asheville's Agatype blog for more details. So here it is. She's giving me another research avenue for me to do more intel on what I love to do, baseball. All right, and then Pat Siri, 1948. Here was an interesting thing with baseball. It kind of goes in clusters, and there's only 2 times with the 4 home run story that 2 guys did it in the same year. That's Mike Cameron and Sean Green, who, interestingly enough, both played for the Mets. And then Scooter Gennett and J.D. Martinez. Now, I got to be honest with you. I can't believe it's 7 years ago. I remember the Scooter Gennett because he was a Red, and he had come out of LSU, and they picked him up from Milwaukee, and he just had this unbelievable season. And he was actually out of baseball 2 years later. But Gennett and J.D. Martinez, also a Met now, they did it in the same year in 2017. Actually, Scooter Gennett did it on D-Day 2017. This is incredible how this is. And then J.D. Martinez did it almost 3 months later on September 4th, 2017. Sandwiched in between them was a guy by the name of Carlos Delgado, also a Met. He did it in 2003. Ready for this? The lines on those guys. Mike Cameron was 4 for 5, 4 RBI. Now, this is what made me mad. I can't tell you how wild the number 4 was, obviously with the 4 home runs. But how many of these home runs were solo shots? And you're saying, man, when you hit 4 home runs, you should have a beast of a day. Cameron actually does. No, not Cameron. Mark Whitten, who in 1993, and I do remember that, he's a guy like Lou Gehrig, kind of had a beast game. You can argue had the greatest game. Well, let me just say this. Sean Green goes 6 for 6 with 6 runs scored and 7 RBIs. Okay, at least there were some guys on base. Maybe. I didn't even do that. He probably drove in a couple of runs with singles. And Sean Green goes 6 for 6, 6 runs scored, 7 RBIs. How about that for a day? Most guys don't even have that for a career on their life. I know I didn't. But here is, I just lost him. Mark Whitten, and he did it against the Reds. That's how I know about it. He goes 4 for 5, 4 runs scored. He had 12 RBIs. I think he had 2 grand slams in the game for the Cardinals. And then I found this out. Later on, he would have his first game, I believe, where he hit 1 right-handed and 1 left-handed. But Whitten just blew the doors off the Reds. That it seems like the Reds are victims here quite a bit. I don't know in this thing. But Mark Whiten, 4 for 5, 4 runs scored, 12 RBIs. I got to get to these guys because I think you'll enjoy this. Gil Hodges, August 31st, 1950. Ready? Here is his numbers. Gil went 5 for 6, 5 runs scored, so I'm happy with that. And he had 9 RBIs. Very happy. Actually, ready for this? Scooter Gennett and Mark Whiten are the only ones with double-digit RBIs. Actually, Scooter was 5 for 5, 4 runs scored, 10 RBIs in his greatest game ever. And like I said, Whiten had 12 RBIs. Ready for this? So Hodges does it at Ebbets Field. Dodgers defeat the Braves 19-3. Dodgers first baseman Hodges becomes the 7th player in Major League history to hit 4 home runs in a single game. And, you know, for any of you big Gil Hodges fans, like my mother-in-law, huge Hodges fan, she was always a little upset that Gil was not made a member of the Hall of Fame. He is in now after many, see, this is what bothers me. Now I'm going off on a tangent. What bothers me, if you're a selector or if you're a voter for a Hall of Fame, either say to yourself, does the guy belong? Yes. Don't give me that, well, he really shouldn't be a fraud. Just put him in. Or just vote for him and just let the chips fall where they may. Here's a guy, Gil Hodges, passes away in 72, was really on the verge of probably becoming an expert manager, had guided the Mets to the 69 World Series, being traded from the Senators. I just remember Chuck Tanner doing the same thing when he went from the A's to the Pirates, and also leading the Pirates, like Gil, to a World Series 3 years later, or 2 years later. Anyway, Gil leads the Mets, and here's the deal. And I've said this before. 71, they had a ton of injuries in 70. They had a ton of injuries in 71. In 72, Gil passes away in spring training. Yogi assumes the reins. And Yogi, of course, had previous baseball experience guiding the Yankees to the 64 pennant and losing a heartbreaker in 7. Those great Cardinals. Well, not a heartbreaker for me. I would have been rooting for Gibson, Brock, and Flood and Bill White of the Cardinals, not the Yankees. But for all you Yankee fans, I can feel for you a little bit. You know, you probably would have had another one of those championships as you approach 30 championships. Meanwhile, there are other teams that don't even sniff 30 wins over the course of 2 months or 3 months in baseball. Are you listening, White Sox? Anyway, Hodges had that team. Definitely, the pitching was there. In fact, they come out of the gate in 72. They won 32 of their first 50 games, and then all the injuries. And as I've pointed out on other shows, in 73, they are haunted by injuries at the very beginning of the season. Then everyone says, wow, it was a miracle. They start from last place, August 15th, and they go like 44-15 the rest of the way. Well, I've often said those are 2/3, or they're basically 50 games, a third of the season. Had you put those two together, you know, the Mets have like 87 wins, 44-30. They have like 76 wins there when they were healthy. And remember, I say this all the time, they had 3 really, well, they had a Hall of Fame pitcher in Seaver. They had a really 2 good lefty pitchers in Koosman and Matlack. I always like Matlack. I know I'm being prejudiced. I know he doesn't have a 500 record, let alone a winning record. Koosman, of course, was a 20-game winner. He was definitely a great player in the clutch. Ask Met fans in 1969. He should have been the MVP of the World Series. 2 big wins. Anyway, Hodges does it. Ready for this? Gil Hodges hits his. I didn't even realize this. Hodges really had a good career. Hodges had 370 home runs, 1,274 RBIs, and a 270 batting average. All solid. In fact, ready for this? I compiled all the stats for all 17 guys that have hit 4 home runs. They hit a total of 5,200 home runs, drove in 20,634 RBIs. But anyway, they averaged 309 home runs for their career, 1,214 RBIs, and a 299 batting average. All right. So you're talking about Gehrig, Colavito, Delgado, who really 473 home runs. And I know he did play in the 90s when everything was up. Delahanty, Hall of Famer, 101 home runs, 346 batting average. Chuck Klein, 300 home runs on the nose, 320 batting average. And he has the other distinction. He and Fox are the only Triple Crown winners from the same city doing it in the same year, 1933. Then you have Gil Hodges, 370 home runs. Joe Adcock, who has the most total bases, or is tied for the most total bases, I should say, because he had 4 home runs and a double. So he had 18 total bases in his game. And ready for this? Adcock in his game went 5 for 5, 5 runs scored, 7 RBIs. And let me just say, hey, listen, instead of seeing me, let me put up some pictures. This way I can go through my stuff. Here's Joe Adcock, who finishes his career with the California or the LA Angels. Bob Horner, of course, came out of Arizona State. I kind of liked Bob Horner. I know he had kind of a controversial career. I don't know if I would call it controversial. I know he was under a lot of pressure. He played for some crummy Braves teams, and he was part of the Braves program, 83, 84, that was starting to get good with, of course, Dale Murphy on that team. You had Phil Niekro. They do win the 82 National League West division, starting out 13-0. But if you talk to a lot of baseball fans, they'll tell you that Horner, how do I say this? Because probably Horner, I shouldn't say it was a disappointment, but Horner, they expected quite a bit more out of him. I think they were looking for another Mike Schmidt. And obviously, Mike Schmidt's only come across once a generation. But he was a solid player. And in fact, ready for this, Horner, for his career, Horner had 218 home runs, 685 RBIs, and a 277 batting average. I think this is the Topps baseball card from like 83 or 84. And here's Schmidt, 1976. Schmidt, as I can continue, I have to just say this so I don't forget it. Mike Schmidt actually is the only player to hit 4 home runs against, and he hit all 4 against the Cubs, but he's the only one who ever hit the 4 home runs against brothers. He hit 1 off Rick Russell, or 2 off Rick Russell, and 1 off his brother Paul Russell, who I thought always had more wins and losses. He was only 16-16 for his career. Rick Russell is, I got to do a show on these guys who are not in the Hall of Fame, but have not just higher WARs, but really fantastically higher WARs than some of the players who are in the Hall of Fame. Do you realize that Rick Russell has a 79 WAR for his career? And he served up 2 home runs to Mike Schmidt in 1976. And actually it was Rick Russell, Mike Garman, and Paul Russell who gave up the home runs. Actually, pardon me, I thought he had 79. Russell had a 69.5 WAR, but that's not the point. The point is, I think there are like at least a dozen players. I think it's even like 6 or 7 pitchers, and I think 3 or 4 are contemporaries that have lower WARs that are in the Hall of Fame. And it goes back to this. Was he as good as his WAR indicated, Russell? And I do think that Russell was a good pitcher, playing on some terrible teams. In fact, he had a 214 and 191 winning record. And the Cub teams, or the teams that he was mired with, he did play for, I think, 2 playoff teams. The Giants, when he was traded out there, and I think he won 20 games out there. And I think a Cubby team I think he might have been on the 84 team. Regardless, he is 23 games above 500 on Cub teams that I think were 2 games under 500 for his career. So he really did a nice job. And of course, he embodied everything that you think of like a farm boy. Big, solid. It looked like he threw bales of hay in the offseason. He was just a fun player, and he had a really self-deprecating personality. But he was 214 in 91. Nonetheless, Schmidt feasted on him that day with 2 home runs, and then he got his brother Paul, who was 16 and 16 in his career, the 4.51. And that's the other thing too. Russell had a 3.37 ERA, not bad when you think about playing in Wrigley Field. Now I got to get to probably before I get to my brother's favorite player, I think. Rocky Colavito, I know my brother liked him a lot. Cleveland Indians, 11, Baltimore, 8. This happened at Memorial Stadium in 1959, June 10th. So that we're coming up on that. Indians right fielder Rocco D. Colavito became the 9th player in Major League history to hit 4 home runs in a single game. He went 4 for 4, 4 homers, a walk, 5 runs scored. And yes, they weren't solo shots. He actually had 6 RBIs. And you know what I just realized? I didn't do my cartoon for the 4 homers, I don't think, right? If I did, I did. All right. Marbles, cue balls, batteries, rocks, bottles, and garbage for hitting 4 homers in a game? They're cheering you, but they ain't throwing team merchandise. It's too expensive. But Rocky Colavito, here he is. Dropped out of school. A Bronx guy. I brought him up one day. He hit his home runs probably off guys that you would probably consider tomato cans, because one was 37 and 44. The other was 38 and 57. And then Ernie Johnson is the guy I want to get into, though. Jerry Walker was 37 and 44 for his life. Arnie Portocario was 38 and 57 for those Baltimore Oriole teams. And Ernie Johnson was 40 and 23, 3.77 ERA, 19 saves. He's from Brattleboro, Vermont. And yes, that's the Ernie Johnson who became a voice for the Atlanta Braves. And when I was looking up his stats, he's 40 and 23, well over 600 winning percentage, lots of saves, decent ERA, 3.77. I don't know why he retired, because it wasn't like he had a bad year, like he was 1 and 10 and had a 7 ERA and no saves. He kind of retired on top and then goes into, he probably saw maybe the handwriting. He was 35, saw maybe the handwriting on the wall and said, you know what? Maybe I can get into announcing. I liked him as an announcer. He did those Brave games when they were on the Superstation. I enjoyed listening to him. I thought he was kind of funny. But even at the time, I never realized he was a former pitcher, nonetheless, Major League Baseball player. And now I got to get to the guy my brother loves. Just loves. We've had our debates, not on Willie Mays' greatness, but I always say, there's Willie Mays. Now, this is 1961. Not one of my favorite cards from the 60s. To be honest, I really don't like these cards. And I guess I'm showing my age, and probably nostalgia is hitting me on this. This is too glossy for me and too slick. This looks like I said, all right, fellas, line it up against the fence or the batting cage. We're just taking snapshots of you, post it, and then we make the baseball card. This one is very plain, very simple, but it's not one of the best Willie Mays cards. The 1971 personal favorite of mine, but there are other ones where, that actually, and I've shown it before, I think the best baseball card that just really embodies who Willie Mays is his last one when he's taken with the New York Mets, and you just see these blacksmith forearms. Just a great, he's still at the age of 42, 43, still chiseled. Just an unbelievable player. Anyway, here's Willie Mays. Did it at County Stadium, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Giants throttle the Braves 14-4. Mays, playing center field, becomes the 10th player in Major League history, but the only member of the 600 club to have 4 in a game. Didn't even realize that, so thanks, Ed. Shout out to you. hits 4 home runs in a game, went 4 for 5 home runs with the 4 home runs, 8 RBIs. Thank you, Willie. He missed a chance for a 5th when in the top of the 9th inning ended with him on deck. Oh, man. And here's a fun point that I didn't even realize that he throws in there. Ready? Hank Aaron had 2. So you're talking about 2 guys who had over 1,400 home runs. 660, 750, probably even more than that. Over 1,400 home runs. Hit 6 home runs in one game. And Mays, like I said, Mays did it off a guy who has the most wins of any of them. Guy by the name of Warren Spahn, 363, 245 in his career, 309 ERA. The shame of that is that Warren Spahn probably looking to get 400 wins, which I was always rooting for. Made me mad about Maddox that he didn't get the 400 wins, that he probably gave up like personal great stats for the accumulation of the numbers, because he did wind up with the Mets. I think he was like 4-15. So if you eliminate that from it, he's like 359 and 231. It's over 130 games over 500. And of course, I can just go on and on about Warren Spahn and Willie Mays. I mean, we're talking about one game having 3 Hall of Famers all being involved. Mays hitting the 4, Aaron hitting the 2, and Warren Spahn being the first victim of Willie Mays. The other guy, Roy, Hafner, Bobby Hall, Johnny Antonelli. Now, Johnny Antonelli actually was 126 and 110. Roy Hafner, I think his first name is, was 78 and 91. They were a total of 80. Antonelli, I do believe this, has the distinction of becoming one of the first bonus babies and in the game. All right, let me just get to a few more as time is running out on us, as always. Mark Whitten, I mentioned. Josh Hamilton. Actually, I want to do the last guy, J.D. Martinez, because he remains the only current player. Diamondbacks' J.D. Martinez became the 19th player in Major League history. He had 4 home runs. He hit a 2-run homer in the 4th, solo shots in the 7th and 8th, and a 2-run homer in the 9th. Finished 4 for 5, 4 homers, 6 RBIs. Ready for this? There was 19, including Josh Gibson. April had 2, May had 4, June 3, July 6, August 1, September 3, still waiting for October. By decades, the most, 2010, 2000, 1950s, and 1930s all have 3 each. And I will tell you this, with the pitchers as they are, ready for this, the pitchers overall, if I have it here, I think I do. But the pitchers overall were 65 and 61 with like a 3.63 ERA. And as I said, the players involved hit 290, 300 plus home runs, and over 1,500 RBIs. So you're talking about good to great to spectacular to Hall of Fame players, all involved in hitting 4 home runs in a game. Hey, this is Will O'Toole. Shout out to my brother Ed for helping me with this. And of course, Howard, who's going to organize this and produce the show. I'll see you next week with another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.